Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In the video today you will see how I go from a sketch to a finished marker illustration. All in all, I think the process took around 3 hours, and so it's been sped up quite a bit today. This is my first video that I filmed with my new setup, and I've got to say I am really enjoying just the difference in the quality of the camera footage and the angle, though one of my biggest lessons that I had to learn from editing this is to be more mindful about where my head and my face is. A couple of times I noticed that my nose and the rim of my glasses was peeking into the shot, and so I kind of had to go through all the footage and remove that because it was not the most flattering of angles. It shouldn't really have mattered, especially because I knew that I was going to speed the footage up by 10 times in the end to get to as fast as this is. However, it was one of those things that once I realised that was the case, I could not stop until I'd found every part of it and corrected the framing. The layout is definitely something I'm much happier with. Not only is the angle of the shot better, but also I don't have to worry so much about erasing things or going over anything that will make the table wobble, because of course this mount is actually connected to my window, which is in front of where I work. No amount of shaking the desk is then going to cause any issues with the camera quality, so that was really quite a nice bonus. Now this picture was inspired by my cat. She has been flirting with a new neighbour through my window, and when they finally got to meet, it was a bit like a Disney princess scene with my cat pretty much dripping with affection for the neighbour. It kind of got me thinking about just how many friends my cat would have behind my back, especially if she got to go out on a little adventure, so I decided to illustrate it. It was a challenge incorporating a full body piece into this sketchbook when I knew the kind of scale of the person that I wanted to do. All in all, I didn't have to redraw much of it to kind of make the whole body fit. However, at the same time, I didn't use any references, and you may notice that I write myself a little note suggesting to myself that I do. I know it's a little bit of not practicing what I preach, when in my last video I said about the importance of getting references. For me, I wanted the piece to really focus on the marker work, and I was quite excited to get through that section, so I didn't spend too long. I decided that the cost of the anatomy and everything was worth it. So, of course, you don't have to follow my lead on that. I am using the same mechanical pencil and square sketchbook that I have done in my recent videos. This is the Faber-Castell Apollo 2325 pencil and the Artway Studio square sketchbook. One of the reasons that I decided that I was going to use alcohol markers in this piece was because I wanted to see just how well the paper would be able to hold up, and I'll go into more detail about that later. I really enjoyed working on this piece. It was very relaxing just to spend some time sitting down and drawing. It's one of my favourite things to do. Sketching this piece was really relaxing. I think I was really inspired with the theme, and so everything kind of fell into place really easily. I know some days I feel like I really struggle to get down what I want, but this was one of the days where everything just seemed to go along really nicely, and I'm quite grateful for that. Just like in my previous video, I am using my Copic multi-liners today in order to do my line art. You can see as well that I go through different stages of rotating the paper. This is just to help me get a nice smooth line going across the page. It was a lot of fun slowly building up the details on this piece, particularly with like the extra dimension of the clothing. I don't particularly do overly detailed sketches, especially because this for me, as I said earlier, was just about getting ready to use the markers on, but I did like the way the little details kind of emerged. It's been very interesting capturing my development of traditional mediums again since I started this channel. One of the things I struggled with in my last video was the hair, and I noticed that when I was inking this one, I felt a lot more confident in getting the overall shapes. I know it's a little bit simpler than the last one, but I did like the way that the tips worked, and I felt that it was particularly more detailed, and that was really reassuring. It's one of those things where it's very clear to see the difference that practice makes. While working on the outfit, I decided that I wanted to have a cute little off-the-shoulder sleeve moment with a pair of dungarees, and I knew that I wanted to make it fairly bold. The whole image was supposed to be quite joyful and uplifting, and I really wanted to kind of capture this moment of joy when an unexpected cat comes over and is super affectionate. As I said in the intro, this piece was inspired because of the relationship between my neighbour and my cat, but it is not my neighbour that I drew today. It is, however, my cat. She makes a couple of guest appearances in the video, and I couldn't bring myself to edit it out. So I decided that when she appears, she'll have her 15 minutes of fame, and we can all appreciate her for just how beautiful and how lovely that she is. Yes, and I'm aware I am incredibly biased in this, and hey, what can I say? I think it's something that every pet owner can relate to. Also, let's face it, there's a reason that cat videos are so popular on the internet. They're just adorable. It may seem really silly, but one of my favourite things about this image was actually the way the cat's lower legs came out. There was something about him, I think it's just because the way Evie kind of stands up against things, that little kind of fluffy trouser style, almost. It's kind of hard to put into words, but it's definitely something that, the little touches in the picture that I enjoyed. You may as well notice, in my original sketch, I planned for her to have kind of like almost knee-high sports socks. However, when I was getting round to the inking, I decided I didn't want that. I wanted instead to practice a larger scale section for skin. I knew going into this that it'd been a very long time since I had last used my alcohol markers, but they are one of my favourite mediums to use. The problem that I have is just they're also one of the ones that I forget how to use effectively the fastest. Don't know what it is, maybe I just go too long in between periods of use. So one of the things I wanted to focus on in this little YouTube series is getting back into the saddle of them. I decided that I was going to start with the skin because it's one of the largest parts for me to illustrate, and it has to be done in a particular way, or at least to me it did, to make sure that it's effective. I was going to build up lots of layers of different skin colours, and I started with a fairly yellowish tone. I gradually build this up with a variety of pinks and purples, and it was one of those things, as I was working on it and looking back at this footage, I kind of wish I'd left it at certain points because I really liked how it was coming along at different moments. But that's part of the joy of practicing. I can now know where to stop pushing my colours a little bit, but also where I can continue and know roughly what end result I can expect. Now, this was the first time I used markers in this sketchpad. It was a real test as well because I knew that in my previous videos I have used a big black pen to build up a very opaque layer of ink very quickly. With markers, of course, particularly alcohol ones, you have to build up layers upon layers in order to get the kind of depth of shadows and colours to really come through. It's one of the joys of working with alcohol markers, in my opinion. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to expect the paper to behave, and as you can see, I do have to put a sheet of paper through because it does naturally bleed through. The paper though doesn't warp, and it didn't really bend or ripple, and also despite all of the layers on top of one another, the paper itself held together really quite well. I was really happy with it, and I will definitely continue to use markers in this sketchbook. I think for me, one of the biggest learning moments for this though was when I realised that the alcohol colourless blender that I have, which is a Copic marker, I don't think I actually know how to apply it down properly, and so there were some areas on the skin and the hair where I'd applied it and it kind of lifted some of the colours, but not for each of the markers in the same way, so that's something I'm going to experiment with more in the future. I'll just have to keep practising, and I know eventually I'll be able to use it in the way that I want to. Having done a bit with the skin, I decided to pause and start the hair. Now, originally I was going to keep it in a kind of mousy blonde colour, however, when it came down to putting the colours onto the clothing and I realised just how much more bright and saturated they were, I decided to make the hair a lot darker. As I was editing this, I definitely saw moments where I enjoyed the direction that the hair was going in before I changed it, and I'd like to explore that more with further pieces. In fact, it was really working on the hair where I realised that the paper saturation limit was being reached. I did a lot of layers, and that's my fault, that's not necessarily the paper's fault. But there were moments when the paper no longer blended nicely and the colours kind of sat on top a little bit more. It was interesting to see then that the interaction between the colours was not going the way that I had intended to. But hey, it's all good learning at the end of the day. I chose some very feminine colours in this picture, and it was a lot of fun to work in. One of my favourite details actually about this is the simple stripes along the shirt. I know that it doesn't take a lot to put them in, but where I hadn't sketched them in, I really liked just how subtle it was without the outline of each stripe, and I'll definitely do that again when I make patterns on clothes. The dungarees were inspired by a colleague of mine who the other day I met wearing these fantastic goth black dungarees, and I was so appreciative of just how cool they were. I cannot wear dungarees myself. I'm really short and I just look like a child, and it's not a good look. So I decided I was going to live my fantasy of dungarees through this character. All in all, I think she looks pretty adorable. Where Evie is a white cat, I decided that I wanted to use different coloured shadows to really give her a sense of life. I would really never recommend shading in just grey when you're doing something in white, because it just makes it feel a little bit flat, and that's not the kind of thing that I like to do in my art. I like to involve as much colour as possible. As the sky was blue, I thought it would be appropriate to push with blue hues for the shadows in this piece, and I think she's looking really soft and gentle and just like the real thing. When it came to doing the background, I had not given myself a lot of actual direction per se. I knew that she was going to be in a field, I knew that I wanted some flower buds, but I was hesitant to sketch anything in. I wanted to kind of see what effects I could create just with individual strokes, and I've got to say I was really pleased with the effect. It was quite intimidating at first seeing such a large part of the canvas that I had to then draw over, but I think the gradual layers of colours from the kind of minty green starting point to the inclusion of the blues it worked really well. I think you get the idea that, you know, there is a sense of depth. In this illustration, I used a mixture of Letrastet, Promarkers and Copic markers. Now both of these are alcohol based and they are a lot of fun to work with, but there is definitely differences in their nibs and applications. Copic are pretty famous for their beautiful, flexible brush nib. It's a very delicate brush to be able to apply the marker ink with, and I really enjoy working with it. You get some really nice blending ability with the inks as well. Whereas the Pro markers have a very firm nib. The Pro markers are very different to the Copic in that respect, and so working with both markers on this piece, it was quite interesting being able to directly compare them. I do think overall I preferred working with the Copics, but it's possibly also undeniably because I have more of the colours in the Copic range, so when I was going to use the Pro markers I was quite limited. One of the great things about the Letrastet set though is that there is a fine liner attachment on some of the nibs. I haven't yet done enough investigation to find out why they're on some but not others, but it allows you to get some really crisp, clean detail lines using the same ink colour that you're using for the broader strokes. This is something that the Copic range do not yet have, and I say yet, hopefully one day they would do, because I think it's a really genius way of being able to have a bit more control over precision strokes. However, I do think it's very optimistic of me thinking that Copic are suddenly going to invest in this kind of change and innovate, especially because they've been so stable in the industry for so long. It's the whole kind of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I had a great time working on this image, and while it's not one of my best, I was definitely able to achieve what I set out to do. That was illustrate a happy character with a cat and use my alcohol markers. So all in all, definitely time well spent. I've definitely remembered some things that I can apply in future videos and in future art pieces, so that's really quite beneficial as well. I'm looking forward to being able to really push my limits and see how much I can develop. And it's also pretty cool whilst doing this for YouTube because it's kind of an instant time capsule. I can see just how quickly it takes me to be able to apply the lessons I've learned into future pieces, and I'm looking forward to that. All in all, I hope you enjoy this video, and if you're inspired at all, I'd love to see any of the things that you create. Share it with me in the comments below. In the meantime, I hope to catch you at the next video where we can continue to explore art together. Take care!